Hi, friends and extended family. I went to court yesterday, and yeah, I haven't been sick in about 4 years, and I've developed a cold, an extremely sore throat, and I assume that's probably just anxiety and stress that's built up in me awaiting court, because court for me holds a lot of stress. Because when I walk in there, the world turns upside down, and there's no rhyme or reason. Law goes out the window. It's all opinion, slander, etc. Canadian court system is, for me, an absolute joke. I have contempt for the courts. Um, I don't have contempt for law, order, reason, any of those things. But unfortunately, the people running these courts have become so corrupt that I just become overwhelmed with stress when I go into this situation. I was expecting some sort of resolution, whereas there was, arrears were adjusted, etc., etc. But none of that took place, and my lawyer wanted to put over to have a discussion and a mediation sort of session. So needless to say, I was frustrated because I had to take an hour-long drive to another town because this woman actually came from another town. She was going to three different towns outside her own town. I guess everybody must know her there, to try and get pregnant when she was doing her little Operation Get Pregnant and get someone to pay for it. So, anyways, I was just wiped out yesterday. And that ties in with, as we were talking about the day before, borderline personality disorder. So what that feels like, and as I mentioned, I mean, in all my scenarios, I'm a high functioner, and I'm using these terms to describe inner feelings, mechanics, um, and behaviors. So, so this is another one of those scenarios when I run up against something and it feels wrong, and my mind tries to work out the solution, put it into logic and reasoning, and it can't do it. And what ends up happening is my anger, rage, etc., overwhelms me, right? So in my head becomes a tornado. And then with that tornado, as it escalates more and more, I mean, it's put me in places, because obviously it's putting me in a place where violence, the rage is wanting to hit, to fight, to it's instigating that fight or flight um, activity in the human body. And anyways, I at the peak of that, what ends up happening, and this wasn't necessarily yesterday, but I mean it was getting there, and I could see the process in my mind, this back and forth, this circular, It reminds me of animals that you see at the zoo. When they're pacing back and forth in their cages over and over repetitively, and that's where I go. I go to this thing, this circular motion, just and I assume that the animals, I mean, physically, they're looking for an opening to get out of this unbearable situation. So that's it's like being a caged animal, and when your emotions lock you up like that, it's a bad place to be. It brings you right here, and it's a bit of a hell that you have to get your focus outside of that. You have to almost disassociate from it to carry on in some sort of other direction. Otherwise, you're just stuck in it. And if there's viewers out there that run into that same thing, I'd like to hear, your take on it and your understanding. Again, I'm doing my own research on these things. So I'm just describing for you how it feels inside of myself when these things happen. And, I think there's a lot of scenarios in the world, and more so, that are getting to a place where, government interference, um, you know, inhumane laws, family law, et cetera. This feminism push against anti-male um, propaganda happening. It's terrifying, and it's unnecessary, and not only that, counterproductive. Because what this whole thing basically trails back to government oversight, misaligned legislation, um, preventing someone like myself from working, putting barriers in my recovery, putting barriers to employment, all these things um, take away from Canada itself, take away from the community. It just creates a draw. And not only that, it creates frustration in men to the point where a lot of them end up killing themselves. I know my adoptive sister dated a guy who killed himself over these sort of things because the court systems just are not set up for common sense and fairness. It's just simply, oh, it's just a man. We can just destroy him and create this situation where, oh, you can pay any amount of money. It doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. And if you can't pay it, we'll take away your license. We'll put you in jail. We'll garnish your bank account. We'll garnish your job. Get you fired from your job. We'll destroy you if you can't pay the amount of money that no one could pay. Um, Anyways, there's been all sorts of people killing themselves in Canada over this whole thing, and even a guy who left a note on I think it was his cigarette pack. His last thing he said was reform Canadian family law. So it's big issues. And yes, thank you very much. A lot of you have pointed out that I'm bright, and I appreciate that. And for a while I had to think, am I mentally retarded? I had to live a lot of scenarios where I had to feel that way because things made no sense, and yet people were following along as if it was okay. And that's not okay to me. And when I go into a place and something is wrong, and people are still um, implementing things when they know it's wrong. I mean, the old saying that was getting quite old in BC was, "We know it's wrong, but it's the law." That does not fly with me. Okay, you got people running around calling people Nazis, this and that and the other. That is what we should be terrified of. That people are doing things that they know are wrong because someone made a law. If that's the case, it's in our 1982 Charter of Rights and Freedoms to overcome that. That we simply revert to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms until that can be abolished or taken care of right now. So if we've got these things that are wrong going on, why are they not being fixed? I'm all about revolution. I think it's time that we stand up, rise up, West. If you want a West, if you want some kind of home to have, you know, because as it stands, the way things are going is that I don't see that happening for for much longer. But again, I've still got some whirlwind floating around in my head. So, revolution, violence. That's where it goes, right? It puts me in that fight or flight scenario mentality, and it's a hard place to sit and be, and it's hard to think rationally. Um, so anyways, again, court was pushed off to June 11th now. Well, everything happens for a reason. Fair enough. I've got some other things to set up on my end, so maybe that'll work in my favor. Who knows? But at the same time, I mean, I'd like to get to a place where I can speak to someone of some authority, i.e., hopefully, a decent judge with some logic and reason, um, and get some kind of justice or some kind of reprieve, whereas I'm able to start over and, continue on with my life without the harassment of these governmental agencies. Um, Dragging me down like balls and chains. You want to talk about hell? I mean, it's just like that. It's being chained. Um, you release. I release myself from the bondage of alcohol and cigarettes in Canada, only to find that I'm being rechained to some other bullshit. So, I mean, you want to talk about slavery. Well, I mean, we have a pretty complicated slave system set up in Canada. So, if you escape the cigarette and tobacco, or the cigarette and alcohol, tobacco and alcohol um, portion, then they've got something else set up behind that for you. Well, we can get you on, some court bullshit and some maintenance and stuff. But at the end of the day, my whole goal is to relieve myself from Canada because I don't want to be involved in it anymore. It's a nation of usury. It's corrupt. It's disgusting. It's toxic. I'm done with it. You people out there in the world think Canada is so shit hot. Come spend your winters in -30. You know, come to a place where people are so ignorant that they poison themselves, and then think there's something wrong with you if you're not poisoning yourself. That's the crazy mentality that I grew up with, right? And I possess that. I remember a fella saying to me, "I don't drink alcohol," and me thinking he was insane. There was something wrong with this individual. So that's the level of sickness and propaganda that we face here. You know, you hear people calling you a white devil. Well, think about it. Um, I mean, I that goes back to my video on personality disorders. Someone may throw what you think is an insult at you. Like, I mean, someone asked me once if I had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And I thought, where are you getting this from? The problem wasn't them. The problem was my ignorance of what borderline personality disorder is and meant. And that's just it. We're talking about ignorance here. The cure for all these problems is education. And when I'm talking about this, I don't mean propaganda, right? If you went to school for an extra 7 to 9 years, okay? Now I haven't been through a law degree and I haven't been through a medical degree. But I can see very clearly that these people aren't necessarily smarter, and in some cases, they're more invested in a system that's completely corrupt and broken, and they're defending it to the detriment of their oath. And I don't know if this is even true, and I sometimes wonder if there's an oath suggesting that they do no harm, because I've seen a lot of harm being done out of the medical industry here in Canada. So, I eventually I think what's going to happen is I'm going to unpack this into one book. I think where it's got the start and finish timeline, and then I can go through it in an organized fashion if I can organize my thoughts and self and explain how the Canadian citizen has been, uh, uh, branded, chained, and enslaved to become this, nonstop consumer of toxicity for the sake of profiteering and I don't know, experimentation on the human animal. Who knows? And that sounds a little dramatic, sure. I'm a little bit of a dramatic individual, I guess. All right. So I love all you, and again, you know, no news with court, and I'm just I'm just not of a good state of mind to be handling this all myself. You know, I did look for advocacy in ADHD groups and things like that, and I just couldn't find any. And my frustration sometimes shuts me down. So, I mean, if there's any ideas out there and how I should be proceeding with this stuff, but you know, my big worry is that I'm going to get in court and just explode, right? Because you know, that whirlwind, I can quell it, I can calm it, I can, you know, push it off to the side, contain it, but it builds. It builds up, it's accumulative, and eventually my worry is that it's going to explode and I'm going to end up, you know, harming someone in frustration or saying something that gets me put in jail or I don't know, whatever. But staying calm, I have to try to remember to stay calm. And, you know, I don't want to say trust in the system. I don't trust in the system. All right, you get it, guys. I may do another video later on today because I wanted to talk a little bit more about, you know, some of the positives of the adoption, and you know, obviously there's positives in every situation, and we have to look for those sometimes. We can't just be all critical all the time, and hopefully you guys don't find me to be so, but you know, there is silver linings, and you know, through great challenge and struggle is growth, and you know, I would like to just eventually get out of this challenge and struggle for a little bit to see and appreciate some of my growth, and maybe apply it to, you know, some more constructive projects. So we'll talk soon. Thanks. Love you all.